Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our latest CISEC webinar, the Psychology of Cybersecurity. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping points to give to you. This session is being recorded, and it will be shared with our members. The recording and slides should be available within 5 to 7 working days. So if you need to step away from today's session, you can catch up later. This webinar is also CPD accredited for 1 hour, and all attendees will be sent a CPD certificate of attendance. Again, please allow about 5 working days for receipt. To minimise background noise, all attendees are muted, but we do encourage interaction through the Q&A feature. So feel free to submit any questions at any time, and we'll aim to answer them during the dedicated Q&A session that we have. Finally, if you experience any technical issues during the session, Microsoft Teams can often be corrected by refreshing your browser or reconnecting. And you can also use the chat function, and I'll look to assist where possible. And that's all for me. I'm now going to hand you over to Sarah James, who is currently chairing today's event. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Dom, and good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure to be here. And I think Dom said record numbers of people have signed up for this webinar, just really showing how important the human factor in security is. So yeah, my name is Sarah James. I'm a fellow at CISEC, Chartered Institute of Information Security, as you already know, and also CEO at Layer 8. And I'm so pleased today that we can be joined by Dr. Sarah Zheng and Tarnveer Singh to talk through our webinar today, which is the Psychology of Cybersecurity, Human Behaviour in the Age of AI. Now, Sarah and Tarnveer are authors of the book, The Psychology of Cybersecurity, and it really advocates for, yes, there you go. Sarah is showing it on her screen, but we'll also, I think we should put the link to it in the chat as well. It looks like a really, really good read. It's on my reading list for sure. But yeah, the book advocates for a deeper understanding of human behaviour, and really that is going to be essential if we're going to strengthen our defences, which is a statement that I definitely concur with, having worked in the industry for quite some time. Now, I've had the pleasure of having a bit of a sneak peek of what Sarah and Tarnveer are covering today, and you're definitely in for a treat because they are linking academic research around neuroscience and cybersecurity, but also getting into detail around practical application, particularly around some of the leadership roles that we have in security, how we might need to deal with some of the psychological stresses of the role, and also stakeholder management. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to spend about 20 minutes or so listening to Sarah and Tarnveer talking about some of the key things that have come out of the book. Then we're going to have a session where I'm going to ask them some questions and get into some details about a few particular topics. And then we're going to have dedicated time for Q&A. As Dom mentioned, please try and use, if you've got a question, the QA function. You should be able to see that in the top of your screen, hopefully, or somewhere. So next to the chat, there's a Q&A box. It just means that we can really find those questions and make sure that we answer all of them. So, having said that, I am going to now hand over to Sarah and Tarnveer to introduce themselves and run you through their talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Sarah. I'm really happy to be here. I'm currently a research fellow, an academic at University College London, where I investigate the crime and security implications of new technologies. Before this, I did my PhD on social engineering attacks, where we really honed in on what are the psychological tricks that people use to create phishing attacks. And so a lot of the things that we talk about in this book comes from that line of research. My study background is in psychology and neurosciences. And between these two things, I also worked in industry for a couple of years in AI and data science. Maybe Tarnveer, you want to say something?
Thank you, Sarah. So my name is Tarnveer Singh. I'm a fellow with the Chartered Institute of Information Security and the British Computer Society. I've worked as a CISO for a good while now, and I'm also a director at my own consultancy. So security is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm really proud to have worked with Sarah on this book together. So hopefully we can share a few insights today. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I'll start sharing my screen. So when we look at the world we live in now, it seems that almost every 4 to 10 seconds there's a cyber attack happening somewhere in the world. We're deeply intertwined with the digital technologies. The reason that we can have this webinar right now is because we are highly dependent on, indeed, computers. So in preparation for this webinar, I asked ChatGPT, actually, can you create an image of a hacker for me? And this is what it came up with, a guy that seems in a very dark place with this black hoodie on and looking at a computer screen. But actually, this is not so, this is quite far from the actual reality of a lot of hackers nowadays. So in the first part of our book, we really honed in on what are these people, or what drives these people that become hackers eventually and create the cyber attacks that are threatening organizations. It turns out that the vast majority of hackers nowadays are teenage boys. And it's this picture is much more a realistic representation of people who conduct cyber attacks. And with the technologies that are emerging now, for instance, artificial intelligence, different types of robots, self-driving cars, and even brain-computer interfaces, the cybersecurity landscape is going to change quite drastically, I would say, in the next 5 to 10 years, because also these cyber criminals are going to get access to these kinds of emerging technologies. I'll say a few words about some of these pictures here. So for instance, in the top right corner, you see a social robot that is being used by police in the Singaporean airport to patrol the public spaces there. And you can imagine that if someone were able to hack into those kinds of robots in the future, what kind of data they might get access to, what it could be used for instance, for espionage practices. But also in home, we know that Tesla is investing in humanoid robots like the one in the top left. Imagine the security risks there. Not to talk about brain-computer interfaces, where literally there's a person here in the UK who claims to be the first cyborg who was born without the ability to see colors. So he worked with a surgeon to get this sort of antenna-looking device implanted in his brain, which translates colors into sound frequencies, so he can perceive sound in a different way. And so all these technologies and sort of the symbiosis between humans and these devices is going to create a whole new world of cybersecurity threats. So with all these emerging technology risks, it's logical, of course, that we place a lot of emphasis on, okay, how can we create technologies that improve our cybersecurity systems? But at the same time, human beings have not really changed in their behaviors and their desires and maybe sort of ideologies that drives them to commit cyber attacks. So instead of looking only at the technological side of cybersecurity, why don't we also focus on the human constant? And here's where I'll hand over to Tarnveer.
Thanks, Sarah. So in the same way, security leaders are implementing things like security operations centers to help deal with the defense. Hackers are also using similar techniques in terms of adapting their own playbooks to better understand and incorporate human psychology. So in the same way, the defenders are adapting playbooks to better deal with the hackers. The hackers are constantly changing through trial and error, trying different methods and tactics, and developing better playbooks that based on what works. So they're exploiting human psychology by manipulating emotions like fear, exploiting trust and curiosity, using these social engineering tactics, through phishing, vishing, and pretexting to bypass existing security protocols. These types of psychological attacks are going to be amplified even further by the use of AI and deepfakes. And this is going to enable hackers to create more convincing impersonations and automate malicious content generation, such as through AI-powered ransomware attacks. So understanding these psychological vulnerabilities is absolutely crucial for organizations to develop more effective defenses, including advanced behavioral analytics and much more targeted and bespoke employee training that will help to counter some of those social engineering tactics that are being used. So the typical tactics that we've seen across this year used by hackers include things like emotional manipulation, where they're tapping into things like urgency, fear, and curiosity to trick victims into acting without thinking. That might be, for example, through creating a sense of panic to pressure a user into clicking malicious links or taking some action that will undermine their security. They also play on authority and trust. So impersonating figures of authority, such as the chief exec, a key representative of the company, or indeed the IT department, to build trust and exploit that victim's natural inclination to comply with requests from those trusted sources. And another tactic is through social proof and empathy, by creating scenarios that help someone appear to be the socially expected response, or by posing as someone in distress. Hackers can leverage principles like social proof and empathy to gain access and to lower a victim's guard. And the last tactic is through baiting and pretexting. So hackers often offer enticing and false narratives like free downloads or prizes to bait victims into compromising their security. So pretexting essentially involves creating a fabricated scenario to gain information or trust from that target. And so these types of psychological attacks will start to evolve further with AI. So we'll have AI-powered social engineering, where AI models will generate highly personalized and convincing phishing emails, messages, and deepfake videos and audio, making attacks much more sophisticated and harder to detect. AI can analyze a target's digital footprint to help develop more convincing phishing emails and other types of communications that are much more personalized and emotionally manipulative. AI chatbot scams with conversational AI can be used to automate interactions with targets, creating persuasive arguments and exploiting emotional cues to trick them into divulging information or performing malicious actions. Other ways that these attacks will evolve with AI, automated attacks where AI can automate various stages of the cyber attack, enabling automated ransomware attacks that adapt and evolve, acting as the perpetrators themselves. And also through deepfakes for disinformation. So AI can generate realistic deepfakes of individuals, which can be used for social engineering fraud, such as impersonating that chief exec or instructing employees to transfer funds or bypass their own security systems. So these are ways that psychological attacks will only just get more and more exploited, and emerging technology will be able to exploit them even further. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that's such a great overview of the sort of psychological tactics that are often used in social engineering attacks. So to make that, I suppose, even more realistic or closer to your imagination, we interviewed actually 3 cyber criminals who regularly, who actually commit cyber attacks for a living. So I took an excerpt from one of these interviews with the first person we interviewed. And I think this really exemplifies the mindset of a hacker and the reasons they use to justify what they do. So I'll read a couple of parts from here. So the first question here was, let's start with the basics. How did you get into cybercrime? And this person mentions that over time they realize how vulnerable many systems are, and that it's kind of an easy opportunity to then exploit those systems. They mentioned, like Tarnveer also described, using phishing scams, malware, ransomware, and all kinds of social engineering. And later on, I think what's really interesting here is, do you ever feel remorse for the damage you cause? And essentially this person says no, because if companies are not really prepared and taking security seriously, this person suggests that they deserve to be attacked and they deserve to suffer. So I think this is a really interesting insight into what drives these people to commit these attacks. And when we looked further into older research where cyber criminals have been interviewed, one of the major factors, maybe not surprisingly, is financial incentives. We've seen with recent cyber attacks how much cyber attacks can harvest for these people. But on the more psychological side, there are a couple of factors that seem really common to these people, which starts with this sort of fascination with how the computer systems actually work. And a potentially political ideology that certain corporations that people might target could reveal that they might be, I don't know, climate activists, or they might act on behalf of a nation state to commit these attacks. Often we find that these people, so again, this teenage boy stereotype that turns to hacking, might be feeling lonely and hasn't really found the social networks in their real life to hang out with. They might feel bored and unchallenged, and together with this common desire to feel valued for doing something, it's kind of easy to turn into hackers. Because on the environmental side, on the right side here, it's very easy to get access to the dark web. And especially when you're being a quiet teenager with your laptop up in your room, parents are actually happy to let you do whatever you want without having to supervise you constantly. And then to provide for, or to cater to that sense of loneliness, there are loads of online hacking communities that people can engage with. And also is quite low investment to get into hacking, which then brings us to the conclusion that social engineering and all kinds of cyber attacks actually are pretty easy, cheap, and effective to execute for even people of relatively young age. And it's only going to get worse, as I said in the very beginning. And so what we should be thinking of is, are there other types of methods that we can, for instance, take from situational crime prevention, from traditional crime settings, to provide cyber physical deterrence to prevent people from going into this nefarious route of becoming a cyber criminal? And so a couple of questions that I think we should be asking ourselves is, how are we doing as a society to prevent teenagers from following this path? Is it economic uncertainty and maybe competitive labor markets that is even further increasing this group of resentful young people that turn to cybercrime? And like I said before, there are many methods from situational crime prevention that we can use as inspiration to reduce hacking opportunities, which we allude to in the book as well. So a case in point is the recent M&S attack, and here's where I'll hand over to Tarnveer again.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So if we look across 2025 and look at some of the key cyber attacks that have taken place this year and how this links back to the topic of this webinar today, we had the M&S attack, cyber attack around Easter, and it's just a case in point in terms of you can tick all the boxes for security compliance, and you can adopt that kind of compliance culture where you've met everything that the security standards expect of you, but that does not necessarily represent actual behavioral security. And I think that that's where we need to kind of step beyond what is the minimum viable product or the minimum that we need to do to achieve security, and more into understanding what are the latent causes of these types of attacks taking place in the first place. So hackers, once they've gained access, they'll look for things like what is your cyber where is your cyber insurance policy kept? What is your business continuity plan? What is your incident response plan? They will access all of this information once they gained access. There's very little that they won't be able to gain access to, and so we've got to switch to the earliest phase in that cycle and make sure that we're preventing them gaining access in the first place. And also the more that you have these plans, the more you have these cookie cutter formulaic plans, the more hackers will understand the standard steps that you're going to follow. And we need to think about this more from the psychology of all of the key stakeholders that are involved, and accept the fact that this standard approach to compliance and standard approach to training does not work. Otherwise, you wouldn't have these major cyber attacks happening in the first place. And the fact that they're using increasingly social engineering and the human side of risk much more in these attacks, it only goes to show that this side is the area that we need to explore further. And it's not just M&S, it's the co-op cyber attack. It's the attacks that have happened against airline firms in the US. You got Jaguar Land Rover, biggest cyber attack in history. In the UK, £2 billion hit, as well as the ones that we'll put up on the screen here. So Co-op, Harrods, M&S. I'm in the insurance sector as a security leader, and if you only need to look across the Atlantic to the US and see how many health insurance firms were hit recently using exactly these tactics. So if we look at these attacks, social engineering methods such as impersonating IT staff were used to compromise many of these firms, particularly M&S, allowing attackers to reset passwords and gain access to internal systems so that they could then deploy ransomware. These attacks highlight vulnerabilities such as weak IT help desk verification protocols and poor network segmentation from the technical side, emphasizing the need for really robust employee training, better verification protocols, as well as improved incident response plans. And in terms of the role of social engineering itself, attackers posed as IT support personnel and tricked help desk employees into resetting admin passwords. They were exploiting human weaknesses, exploiting human behavior by creating a believable, false narrative, which is the characteristic hallmark, and they were able to successfully gain entry. So bypassing initial safeguards and gaining access to those internal networks. And in the M&S and Co-op and the Howard attacks, it just showed that this is really a coordinated campaign. It's coordinated effort using similar kind of social engineering tactics, which were linked to the scattered spider group. But essentially, it's the human side that seems to be consistently coming up as a trend across all of these major cyber attacks. And once inside, they were easily able to just sit and watch, understand the lay of the land, and then deploy ransomware right at the end when they had absolutely everything they needed. They had all the net data they needed to exfiltrate, and it was the very last step in the process. So that they'd gained access for a considerable period of time. M&S's systems were initially breached through a third-party contractor, and again, it goes to show how across not just the main company we're at, but across the supply chain and third parties, we need to be working more cohesively and considering this human risk. Lessons and kind of key preventative measures. Again, yes, you can implement self-service password reset. You can issue clear guidance on what information the help desk should or should not be asking. Help to build that understanding amongst employees of what they will be asked and what they won't, and strengthen their ability to question when they're being approached, whether they're being approached physically at their premises, challenging people and checking their ID cards, or whether when they're remote working, challenging people who are asking for information that they may not require. So that strengthening their ability to question everything and question and challenge is absolutely key, as well as the consideration of technical controls. So like I said, self-service password reset, the use of biometrics, use of MFA, again, creating those technical layers as well to think of security way beyond simply just passwords. Improving network segmentation, that also helps on the technical side and incident response planning, but bringing it back to the human side of it. Regular staff training, which really is directly linked to what security incidents or near misses have happened that year. So really tailoring your training to the real life mistakes that employees are making, using lots of examples, recent examples throughout that training to help embed that, and making it bespoke to the day-to-day working of specific groups of employees, so it's clear how that links back to their day-to-day life. And one last thing I'll mention is around red team exercises. This is really important because conducting regular testing and exercising of routes into the company, whether that's physical entry, social engineering via telephone, email, social media, or through Teams, test your employees' actual working knowledge, and don't just assume because you've ticked the box for security training that's sufficient. Test their actual knowledge day to day, unannounced, if need be, and identify weaknesses and routes into the organization, and tailor that training so that you have a virtuous cycle of training and testing, and that will help to embed continuous improvement. Sarah, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tarnveer. I think that is really a great example of how just having technical skills is not enough, even as a hacker, but also as a cybersecurity professional. We also really need to understand those human factors to be able to defend ourselves better in the end. This relates actually to one of the points you made regarding governance and risk and compliance, where cases like the M&S attack really make you wonder, how was it possible that despite checking all those boxes for those compliance frameworks, there was still this huge attack that materialized? And one of the points here I wanted to make is that when we look at studies on phishing click rates with simulated tests, it seems that 5 to 20% at least of employees in an average organization keeps on clicking on these phishing links, regardless of how many trainings you give to them. So the question then really becomes is it the quality of the training that's not good enough, or is it a specific type of employee that is very vulnerable to these things, or are the phishing attacks just getting too good because of AI? So there are a lot of open questions in this space, but generally what does seem a constant is, again, I'll go a little bit into the neuropsychology background I have, where when people receive an email and they have to determine, can I trust this, yes or no, they rely on the context in which that email is sent. So if you are, let's say, a product manager in, I don't know, a finance department, any email that alludes to that particular context will be trusted more overall, regardless of whatever technical indicators might be present in that email. So because we trust so much on this context, it makes us very vulnerable to believing things that are not necessarily true. In short, having a sense of trust that does not necessarily equate truth. And this is why brains are easily fooled. But on the flip side, it is also quite easy for people to fool others. And if we were in a room right now in physical space, I would ask everyone to put their hand up if you believe you have never successfully lied to someone. And usually nobody puts their hand up, because a lot of people are capable of telling lies, even if it's just a small white lie. So it should not be surprising in a way that these social engineering attacks are so successful. And in the interest of time, I won't go into a lot of detail here, but we did a study that tried to understand what are the sorts of cues that people in general use to judge whether something is true or a lie. And the first finding from this set of experiments is that people are bad lie detectors partially because they rely on unhelpful cues. For instance, if I lie myself, so lying oneself, it seemed to enhance the suspicion in people for whether other people are lying. And we found that precisely this phenomenon is not very helpful. So when you lie a lot, you're more likely to believe other people are lying a lot because you use your own behavior to understand other people. But that's just not necessarily the case. And the opposite works as well. So if you are a very honest person, it's likely that you will believe other people are mostly honest to you as well. So we can use these kinds of psychological findings to translate them into better human cybersecurity risk management. And I'll give you an example of that in a follow-up study that we did. Yeah, this is a little hint. It's not through a 30-minute cookie cutter training like Tarnveer mentioned. Here we thought, well, maybe instead of telling people what they should be looking at and should not be looking at when they receive emails, it's a more helpful approach by taking inspiration from this red teaming exercise, as well as this self-projection phenomenon I just mentioned, and create an adversarial type of training. So in this study, we had people from my institute, both staff and students, complete either this adversarial type of training or a conventional phishing awareness training. And then 2 weeks later, we sent all of them a simulated phishing email, one of 5 different types. And then we compared which of these 2 groups was better at detecting the email. So I'll explain what adversarial training in this case is. This is really where we wanted people to engage with how a hacker would think about creating a phishing attack specifically for them. So we work with this actor to create a story around this person is going to social media, in this case, harvests a lot of information about the person they want to send a spear phishing email to, and then goes on to show the viewer exactly how they would create a fake email address, create a convincing email message to them, and then we essentially ask the participants in the study to do the same. And create their own phishing emails. So this is just an example where we gave a scenario of you're trying to obtain the login details of someone at the United Nations. And this is an actual response of one of our participants on the right side, where they created a fake email address, systems.security@unadmin.com, and I would say quite a convincing email message. They really put effort into the training. And then when we compare the click rates between the conventional group and the adversarial group, we see that the conventional group had about a 15% victimization rate. And just to reiterate, conventional training in this case means giving people advice on how to detect phishing emails. So we told people in a similar kind of video setup, do not click on links, always check sending email addresses, hover over links that you find in emails, etc., etc. And then when we look at the adversarial training group, although it's a smaller group overall, the victimization rate was around 5%. So in a way, you could argue here, based on these results, that adversarial training is about 3 times more effective than a conventional approach to cybersecurity training. And although this is a small sample and in an academic organization setting, we believe that this other kind of psychologically rooted cybersecurity training could be a really promising avenue for training your people in a more effective way. But even here, we saw that in the adversarial group, there were 2 people who clicked on one of the phishing emails that we sent. So at the same time, we also want to make the point here that it doesn't matter how much effort you put into your cybersecurity measures, whether that's your technology stack, whether it's awareness programs and training, there's always going to be a small percentage of risk of a person who might be stressed or going through a divorce who will click on a phishing attack. So then one of the topics that we talk about in the book as well is how then can you build this resilience for the long term? How do you recover from those cyber incidents? And this really has to do with how we respond to these types of adversities. I'm sure in the Q&A, Tarnveer can also explain from his wealth of experience how he's testing that out in his current organization with red teaming exercises, etc. So what we want to leave you with here with this presentation is really a couple of questions to reflect on, starting with what does an acceptable level of human risk actually look like in your organization? Or in other words, what is a sufficient level of cyber awareness and hygiene? And what psychological methods have you actually tried in your organizations to reduce human risk? Would you consider, for instance, an adversarial training, or would you consider looking into the specific language that you use when you try to educate people about cybersecurity? Because it could be the case people don't generally like to be told what to do. So maybe instead of saying, hey, you shouldn't click on links in emails, we should change our language there and try out a different approach as well. And also in the interest of time, I'll leave it at this, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah and Tarnveer. What a fantastic mini insight into your book. And I know there's lots more juicy stuff in there. I just want to pick up on a couple of points, and then we'll come to people's questions alongside the ones that we wanted to investigate. A couple of things that really struck me. First of all, around hackers updating their playbooks, and it's really interesting because today I was learning on another call about click fix attacks, where hackers are actually getting us to paste malicious code directly into command lines, kind of playing on all the updated security things that we've put in. And your point as well, Sarah, around let's focus on the human constant, because it's almost impossible to keep everybody in our businesses up to date with all the different new techniques, but actually the constant is that that slightly odd behavior, that's something that's not quite right, and building that muscle around, we know these things are going to happen, but let's ensure that people know what to do if it does, like making sure that that behavior of reporting is something that's completely instilled, people know how to do it, and they feel able to say, I just need to stop a minute and reflect on this. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to add any points to that, Sarah or Tarnveer.
I 100% agree with what you just said, and yeah, I'm not sure what to add, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, it's the human constant. So, there's always going to be technical means that we can deploy to fend off certain types of cyber attacks. But you end up reaching a point of diminishing returns based on the technologies the hackers are using and the technologies that you're deploying. So, if they've got AI, you're using AI. If they're using machine learning, you're using machine learning. If they're using, certain techniques, you adapt yours to try and match theirs. But once you've matched them, you reach the law of diminishing returns, right? So what do you then focus on? Well, the reality is there's human beings in all of our organizations, and we need to focus on that side, and that's the constant that's always existed. And if we look at the trend across this year, you can see quite clearly it's not it's not the ransomware. The hackers had ransomware 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
They've had that in the back pocket ready and waiting. but now they've switched to social engineering and tricking human beings, and they'll use the easiest point to get into the organization. So why use all this emerging tech and AI and all the rest of it when you could just simply deceive somebody? And once you've got that foot through the door, you've seen this year, they've sat there for months on those internal networks, absolute months, sat there assessing the lay of the land before they, escalated their attack. And that they really understood those organizations inside out and out, had access to all of their sensitive information. And then only at the last stage thought, okay, we've got all these technical means in terms of ransomware, let's deploy that. That was the last stage. So the human constant is really where we need to now focus.
Yeah, thank you both. Two other quick points as well. You mentioned real life stories. We've seen how important they are. Sometimes in security, we're perhaps unwilling to share some of the details of things that have happened, but we have a human bias that if we're hearing stories about other people, we think, well, not us, not me, we're okay. So being able to share stories about what's actually happening inside your organization, it's really, really important. Also, to connect that, the piece about the adversarial training, we've used it in a lot of organisations to expand your small research, Sarah. It really does work because people can figure things out for themselves, and we know as human beings, if we learn something on our own terms, we're much more likely to own that and live it. I don't know about any of you lot on the call, but if somebody tells me how I'm supposed to behave, I kind of don't want to listen. I want to figure it out myself. So we know that those sorts of things are really, really good ways to learn. Cool. I'm going to come into some of the points that have been raised in the chat. So in the Q&A, I should say. So one of the topics that we wanted to talk about is how somebody working in this field, or perhaps as a leader in this field, could take some of this content and use it practically. And there's a couple of questions in the chat that relate to that. So bear with me while I find it. There's so many questions in here. I'm going up and down now. Right, okay, so this one here from Steve. So we've known for decades how to secure systems and data, yet continue to fail to even do the basics. What psychological levers do you recommend to improve this situation? And Sarah, maybe I'm going to come to you first with that question around, how can we use these psychological levers inside an organisation to really help embed those behaviours?
That's such a great question. There are so many human factors actually that play a role in cybersecurity, but I think one really important one is risk perception. And you actually just alluded to that as well, Sarah. If people believe that they are not really a target for cyber attacks, then why should they change their behavior at all? And I think it really starts with having that actual awareness that people's individual behavior in organizations does impact the risk level that you expose your organization to. And I would say, as a cybersecurity professional, I would start by asking different types of questions. So, like the question asker here, instead of focusing on these technological measures only, maybe we can start talking about questions like, really, what does this human risk level look like that is acceptable to our organization? What do we want people to actually do when they may have clicked on a phishing email? Do they know the routes to report it to the right person? But also certain types of requests that are unsolicited from your IT department or from your HR or finance departments. We should really have these digital norms, I would say, or communication norms about how do you want those things to happen? How do you want to respond in case someone out of the blue asks you for any personal information or even login details? And then I think once you have asked those questions and open up that conversation within your organization with your security leaders or your exco, then you can start looking into some of the research findings and take inspiration from there to see what are the specific behaviors that we want to focus in our organization, because maybe the problem in your organization is not really phishing click rates, but it's access to files or something else. So it's really try to hone in on what context matters to you specifically here to determine what behavioral levers you want to tackle.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. We always have this phrase, we say conversation changes culture.
Mm.
And actually being able to ask really good questions is a skill, because it's really about, obviously as a security person, we understand and we know the risk. As a business person, they understand that, you know, they're part of the business and what they're trying to achieve. But if we can come to a conversation where it's really truly about understanding each other, then we can often find some really good paths to move forward. So Tarnveer, you're off mute. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just to expand on the points Sarah already made. I mean, obviously, we need to start deploying more psychological techniques. So, you know, with psychology, there is a toolkit there in terms of how to influence secure behavior. So we need to start to think of security not just as by those security standards and frameworks and the technical, technical compliance side, but think of it more as a behavioral ecosystem and how we can, embed those secure behaviors. So think of things like, in psychology, there's cognitive load theory. How can we simplify our interfaces and reduce decision fatigue to prevent those errors happening in the first place? Behavioral nudges, so using defaults, framing, and prompts to help guide secure choices, so help make it easier for employees. And social proof and norms, so highlight positive behaviors. So, in your organization, instead of saying, here's 10% of you have done this wrong, why don't we say, well, 90% of the team updated their passwords, and then and use that to drive conformity. And threat perception models, tailoring messaging to match the user's perceived severity and susceptibility. And the last one's just around, the formation of habits. Just really reinforce secure behaviors through repetition, reward, and environmental cues. And that's the way you're going to get those right habits amongst employees, and really ensure that that you're driving the right behaviors. Because until you do that, you can't really blame the employees, can you?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tarnveer. There is a lot of research and evidence that positive reinforcement works far better than negative reinforcement. I mean, obviously, that's not to say that there has to, there can't be any consequences. Of course, there does need to be, but positive reinforcement is really powerful because it doesn't just sort of help the person, it also helps people understand that there is something that we can do to counteract these things. Sometimes we hear so many negative stories, we sometimes think, is there any point? Is my little behavior actually going to help? Awesome. I want to touch on some points that have been raised in the chat around third parties. So not in the chat, in the Q&A, apologies. So there's a question from Dave here. Jaguar Land Rover, we're not insured for the cyber attack. Do you think this is a choice? Insurance should be left to a company. Sorry, that isn't about third parties, it's about insurance. We'll come to the insurance ones first then, and then we'll talk about third parties. So yeah, Tarnveer, maybe this one is for you, working in the insurance sector, possibly legislating all companies must be insured. Your thoughts?
Oh, that's always like baiting. I think it's I could do a webinar on just this, cyber insurance and its effectiveness. I think at its very best, cyber insurance should be seen as a backstop. That's all it's there for. It's not a replacement for security. It's not a replacement for good security. It's there if every single line of defense has failed, and you need to then approach your cyber insurer and say, please bail us out of this awful predicament that we're in. Well, we need to flip that narrative back to good security and preventing us ever having to go to them in the first place. And human security, I'd say, is the area that's being certainly a growing area of risk this year. And I think moving forwards, yes, there'll be AI-related attacks. Yes, there'll be a huge number of attacks based on emerging tech. But this is a constant that we can't avoid, and we need to start developing better muscle memory amongst our employees, and reinforcing the right behaviors and approaching it as a behavioral ecosystem. And the reason that we essentially wrote this book is because we have, as an industry, way too many silos. I'd say many organizations are very fearful about sharing information about what's happened in their organization. So you may have, a lot of rich information about how employees are being targeted, security incidents that have happened in your organization, but we keep all of that information locked within our organizations, and we don't let research take place. So there's some fantastic researchers out there like Sarah that are making huge strides in, and that really want to get involved and support our organizations to better understand and better use that data to drive better outcomes at the other side of it. But if we start to form these silos and not let research take place, then we're going to be putting ourselves on the back foot. Whereas the hackers, they're colluding, they're working together, they're finding out what works, they're sharing information. So we as an industry really need to unlock the doors to our organizations and let research take place and provide support to researchers. And yeah, in terms of cyber insurance, let's not forget there's huge numbers of exclusions. There's all sorts of things in there in the black and white, in the small wording that when you only realize in an actual event, when you go to the cyber insurance, say, please can you bail us out, and they say, well, if you refer to page 25 in the small print, you're not actually fully covered for that type of eventuality. And there's many organizations, to all the security leaders out there, I'd ask them to please look into their cyber insurance and see if they're covered for social engineering. They may find that they're covered for software vulnerabilities, they're covered for ransomware, but they may find they may not be covered for social engineering. So they may want to look into that as well. So just a few lessons from practical life, really.
Yeah, thanks, Tarnveer. I was at a session yesterday. Oh, well, not yesterday, last week, with a cyber insurer who kind of like said, yeah, they hardly ever pay out. So, and that was them saying it. Cool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about third parties then. So we've got a question here from Dave he says, Jaguar Land Rover were not insured. No, I'm reading the same one again. Sorry, I will actually get to the right questions in a moment. Okay. Basically, I can't find the question now, but the question was around how can we ensure that our third parties are doing adequate security training?
Sarah, yeah, do you want me to take this one first, and then you could jump on?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So it comes from this whole compliance culture and following of standards, and sometimes internally in our organizations, us as security professionals, we make sure we're ticking all the boxes for ISO 27001 and our other security standards, and we say, okay, because we've met all the ticked all the boxes, we're safe. And and we've proven in this webinar why that's not the case. In a similar way with third parties, just because you've sent a supplier assurance questionnaire out with a ridiculous number of questions delving into the aspects of their security, and maybe after weeks and weeks they've sent that back, and you've maybe done a bit of work with them to ascertain how much of that information is correct, probed a little bit into their technical security. Does that mean that you've obtained a copy of the ISO 27001 certificate and assessed when they did their last pen test? Does that mean that you've assessed that supplier or third party sufficiently? No. That's the honesty of it. The reality is we need to start considering the human aspects of those third parties as well. So how effective is their security program? How well are they considering human risk within their organizations? So referring back to one of the cyber attacks that happened this year, it happened, let's say the M&S cyber attack, it happened through, and some of the others ones as well. They happened through the Jaguar Land Rover, I believe. It happened through a third party. So I think that was with TCS. It happened through a third party, and social engineering was involved, and countless other examples this year of social engineering being involved. Are we probing the human risk side of our third parties, and considering that aspect of it as much as we are focused on the technical aspects of security with those third parties? That's the side we need to start to better get a gauge for. So once we start to think of security more as a behavioral ecosystem, we start applying behavioral metrics, and then we start considering our other stakeholders in the game through that lens. Until we start to do that, we're not going to achieve better security just by asking for copies of the ISO 27001 certificate and a few technical questions. We're not going to achieve it that way. No. So yeah, we need to have a more nuanced approach. Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah, I would just add to that, that I think it's all coming down to due diligence. Once you want to work with a third party, just make sure that vetting their cybersecurity practices are up to your standards when you do your background checks on them. And also, behaviorally speaking, once you establish the communication between that third party and you, it needs to be very clear to both parties in what way you want normal communications and requests to happen, and that any deviation from that should automatically flag up potential risk.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. There's loads of questions in the Q&A. I'm going to ask Dom maybe to let us know whether some of the ones that we don't get to we could take offline and answer. But there's two more things. I want to ask Sarah and Tarnveer in a moment just to give one practical tip. But I'm just going to come to one more question here from Suzanne. She says, how do you see the correlation of risky cyber behaviours at home manifesting in the workplace? And do you think organisations who openly care about human factors, not just while at work, can use that to their advantage? Maybe that's one for you to start with, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So unfortunately, there are not many studies that actually look into this in detail. I do know from personal experience that in corporations like IBM, they will say you have to do this cybersecurity training because it will also help you in your personal life. But there's no evidence that that is actually the case. Actually, I would say when it comes to the realm of phishing attacks, it's often that there are two groups, sort of. So one group is occasionally clicking on your simulated phishing attacks because they were stressed. It was circumstantial. It was because of the context they were in. They were distracted or stressed. They just came back from holidays or something that made them more vulnerable in that particular moment. But on average, they're pretty good. And then there's maybe a second group here that does repeatedly fall for phishing attacks, which I think has more to do with that psychological phenomenon I talked about, where very honest people think that in general, they're not really targets for cyber attacks. So my hypothesis would be that if you are in that second category, it doesn't matter what kind of training you get at your work. Probably it doesn't matter if you're at home or in the office, you're equally vulnerable, I would say. But again, this needs to be tested.
Yeah, so I'd concur with that, but I would also say your behaviours transfer with you, whether across all boundaries, whether it's your personal or professional life. Increasingly our work laptops are used at home. The boundaries of work and personal life is really blurred, and usually if you're how secure you behave in your personal life does have a bearing not a direct link, but a bearing on how you behave in the professional life as well. But we tend to find people do keep themselves secure much more in their personal lives, you know, with their bank accounts and things like that. So we certainly need to encourage the right behaviours through that behavioural ecosystem I mentioned earlier.
I think we just lost Sarah.
Okay.
Maybe Dom, you could take over.
Yeah, I think we may have lost Sarah. Oh, hang on, I just need to quickly unmute her.
Hiya, thank you. Yes, I froze and couldn't hear you, but I could see that your lips were still moving, so I guess that you were still answering my question. We're at time now. I was going to ask you maybe to leave with one thing that everybody could do practically if they were in a role in an organisation and they needed to kind of make a change. So perhaps if we could just have a quick answer on that and then we wrap the call off. But thank you so much, Tarnveer and Sarah.
Yeah, thanks a lot to all of you and all the attendants. I would say start with piloting new approaches that really target psychological factors. And there are a couple of ideas that we explain in the book. And yeah, you can also just reach out directly if you want to chat about any of these ideas.
Thank you. Tarnveer.
Thank you. Yeah, I just concur with that. Just, you know, I'd say as for security leaders out there, to focus on winning buy-in at senior level, test your assumptions, test employees and how much of your training is sinking in, and start to use these behavioral metrics, which will help you understand and develop a behavioral ecosystem. You know, measure what matters and make security and secure behavior the easy default and rewarded choice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. The comments in the chat are amazing. Everybody's thought this was a fantastic session. And yeah, any questions that we didn't manage to answer, Dom, let's have a look at those and see if we can get back to people. Thank you very much and enjoy your afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, quite a number of questions. So we'll look to try and follow those up with a resource piece for members. And just to confirm, recording and slides and CP certificates circulated next week. And a quick plug for CISEC Live, because Sarah is hosting a human aspect workshop on how you can truly change behaviour and culture in cyber with another great panel. Search CISEC Live or follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks to everyone attending. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.